There was this little school called Jefferson Elementary, and there was a community of people at Jefferson who wanted to create a small school, a school within a school. Jefferson, like Cox, was one of the most overcrowded, underperforming elementary schools in the city. Year-round, multi-track, one of those like sort of portable, like yards, portables everywhere. And so this community wanted to build a small school. The district said no. And Oakland Community Organizations is a community-based organization that does community organizing. It's faith-based community organizing organization that's been in Oakland for about 30 years. And they're based at St. Elizabeth. They had a local organizing committee at St. Elizabeth Church, right around the corner from Jefferson Elementary. And the families there started to organize through OCO. And in organizing, they mobilized and asked the superintendent for that small school again. He said no. And when he said no, OCO turned to the charter community and said, okay, well, if we can't do it through the school district, we'll do it through charter law. And they had 5 charters written that year and passed. And this was a city that didn't have very many charters at the time. And this was, I think, 1999, 5 charters. And this is how E.C. Reams came to play, and Dolores Huerta, and many of sort of the grassroots charters in the city. And then the district was like, okay, wait, let's talk, and we'll create a small schools policy. So then they created the small schools policy, and Oakland Unified had one of the first new small autonomous schools policy in the city. And part of it was a reaction to trying to avoid charters. And so this is the first city where KIPP came in and it wasn't a charter, and there's a Met school, like a big picture school that isn't a charter. But interestingly, it was around that time that the small schools movement had started. Everyone thinks, oh, we're going to bring it all in the system, and we're going to get all these charter-like flexibilities in the system. And then state takeover came in Oakland, and Randy Ward became the state administrator, and the school board was nullified. And Randy had been at Compton, came here, and I think saw the value of choice and options for families, especially in a city where there wasn't a lot, and there was still lots of failure. So during that era, quite a few charters, the charter movement was gaining momentum statewide anyway, and resources were being put forward towards charters development. And so that was during those 5 years of state administration, the charter movement grew dramatically. So in 2000, I want to say there were maybe 2,500 children in charter schools, and 10 years later there were almost 10,000 kids in charter schools. So, and just to clarify, Oakland Unified School District back then had about 60,000 kids in it, and now only has about 38,000 children in it. So there's been massive declining enrollment at Oakland Unified. Some of that is because of charters. A lot of it is actually because of private school growth. So choice has happened on 2 fronts, charter schools and private schools. The charter movement, I think, in this city has been interesting because it started a long time ago, and it was very grassroots. The first charter school in Oakland was a little school called Jingletown, which ended up being American Indian. So most of the charters that started with these sort of singleton grassroots charters that struggled, frankly. I think we now know how hard it is to open a school and sustain and develop, sustain a school. But back then there was a little bit of, I think, of a naivete around how easy it is to open and start a school. So a lot of like fledgling charter schools struggled. And I think over time what's happened is some of those schools have gone away. Some of those schools have reconfigured themselves. So that one reconfigured itself as American Indian. Dolores Huerta closed, and Aspire took it over. So there's been some shifting in the charter portfolio in Oakland. But still, to date, most of the charter schools in Oakland are actually still sort of grassroots, like individually run charters that are disconnected from charter management organizations. And unlike cities like LA or DC or some of the other cities or New Orleans, there aren't big CMO players in this city, with the exception of Aspire, which has the biggest footprint here. Otherwise, even though the charter movement is pretty big here, it's almost 10,000 kids and growing very quickly. So now 20% of the school-age children are in charter schools.